Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. It's a sort of a wet and windy day in West Sussex where I'm talking to you from. What I'll share with you in the next 20 minutes is going to be based on some research that we've conducted at IBM during the course of this year. So it's fresh, it's new, it's relevant, and it's really been based on, as Justin spoke about a few minutes ago, the need for the HR function and HR practitioners to think about the world of work, how we work and why we work at this point in time, and what the implications are from an HR perspective as they drive the organization forward. So I'll talk to you about accelerating what we call the journey to the digital HR model. In IBM, we've chosen to call that HR 3.0 because we've evolved. It's a third iteration of HR, but I'll take you through that. Now, there's a huge amount of content here, and I'll just choose some of the key themes and key messages. The deck that you'll see today is available for you afterwards, and happy to engage afterwards as well. There are 10 specific key actions which I'll call out. I won't have time today to go into all of those, but I hope that I can pick on a few of the key elements for you and take you through that today. So with that, I'll go. So yes, there is a need for transformational change. And while there are many and multiple factors driving that, in our research and what I share with you on the screen right now, we think about 3 or 4 of those as being key. The first one I'll call out is driving this transformational change is the impact and the effect of technology, what we call exponential technology. IA, machine learning, robotics, Internet of Things, 5G, these all coming together as a way of driving fundamental change into the organization. And while many of these technologies have been around for a while, there are some key characteristics which are recent. Firstly, the barriers to entry that have been there in place over the years around costs, for example, are substantially lower. The speed at which the technology can be deployed into organization and into an enterprise is much quicker than in the past. And I assume many people saw that early in the pandemic this year. The ability to move on to digital platforms for video calls, etc., was done very, very quickly. But even at the enterprise level, technology is now able to be deployed at a lower cost and at a much quicker speed. And in addition, the value and the enhancements to this technology now takes place on a much more frequent basis, some of them dynamic, some of them at least twice in a calendar year. So that the exponential impact of technology is key and driving substantial change. Off the back of that, organizations and enterprises, whether they're at national, European or international level, what we're also finding is that these organizations have had to fundamentally adapt their strategies and the way they set up as a business, as an organization. So the operating models, the processes, the procedures, and the way that they've gone to market has been tested and is fundamentally changing, again, at a rapid pace. Some of the early innovators in the space would be Uber, Airbnb. I'm sure most of us or all of us are familiar with those organizations which fundamentally changed the revenue models and the way of operating. If I think of more recent examples, you want to think, for example, of Ocado. Ocado, most of us would know, started out as a delivery service for supermarkets. And what they've quickly discovered over the last few years is that the data that they've accumulated through their process, through that operating model, but also the technology platform that they've created is as valuable, if not more valuable, for their clients. And they now moved into that sort of space where they sell their platforms and provide services in that space. Retail sector, classic example, just this week, we've seen the rapid shift to online shopping and the impact that's had on the traditional bricks and mortar type of organization. So, fundamentally, it's the technology. Secondly, the pace at which that's happening and the implications on business, which is requiring HR as a set of practitioners to think differently around how they operate. The discussion today about some of those prevailing forces would not be complete without the other element, which is, of course, the pandemic, which we all have kind of been hit by this year. Fundamentally changed the way we think about business, the health and safety and well-being of our employees, the nature of work, hybrid work versus working on locations. Everything about the way we went to work, why we work, and how we work has been fundamentally impacted by the pandemic. Now, there's a good chance that the vaccine will make a big change for that. That all the research indicates it will not go back to the way of work even a year ago. So that's clear. And we continue to see a number of societal changes on the horizon, be it around inclusiveness and equity, climate change on the horizon, and the implications of climate change as well. So there are a few more, I'm sure. Others have different perspectives, but those are the key elements that I would call out for today's discussion, today's topic, that is driving fundamental change into the organization, and therefore the need for the HR function to react. So, based on the research which I mentioned earlier, we are starting to see some good data points coming through. But with all that rapid change, and that change continuing to go at an even more rapid pace, all the data is pointing to the fact that, from an HR perspective and across the enterprise, there's a strong need for the human element to come to the fore and be amplified, if you wish. Employees now saying that this is probably the most stressful stages of their career, no matter how long you've been working. The speed at which change is taking place can often be disturbing. And there's this need from an HR perspective to focus on building strong engagement in this virtual and hybrid world in which we operate, fostering trust and uncertainty at this point in time is high. So how do we get that trust going very well? And then obviously building a resilient workforce, because the idea is that this will keep changing over and over again. So our research also indicates that 90% of organizations are in the midst of an enterprise-wide transformation, but the HR function needs to adapt and change to that as well. So I'll spend the next few minutes just talking through some of what the research is pointing to in terms of the role of HR. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll be able to see what I'm referencing. Essentially, we've called the next evolution, the digital HR function, HR 3.0. And I'll call out a few elements here because I think this is an important part of the insights I'm sharing today. So firstly, in terms of the key focus areas for the new HR function, there are some key characteristics and focus areas that we have found through our research, and some of the leading HR organizations are moving towards. And that is that the employee experience is becoming fundamentally important. HR is being looked at to take the lead in architecting what we call the employee experience, using the customer experience, which has been around for a while, as the basis for that, but now a increased demand and expectation that the experience that employees have in the physical workspace, in the digital workspace, is intuitive, is easy to use. It builds trust and resilience, and of course, it's mobile enabled is a huge expectation. The use of cognitive tools, I mentioned that earlier, playing a key role from an HR perspective. By cognitive tools, I'm talking about elements such as RPA, artificial learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence, all the newer emerging technologies, the need to use that from an employee perspective. We also see a move to much higher levels of expectation around personalization. So there's hyper-personalized expectation that employees now have of any organization. So, self-service has been around for a while for most organizations. Some of the early adopters moving to chatbots and virtual agents and using that to create higher levels of personalization. If I think of another example particular to our environment in which we operate now, and that's around learning. So an expectation that learning is now much more personalized. So the content that's specific to a role and to an individual, depending on where they are in their personal proficiency, is provided to employees in a much more personalized way. The content's curated and sequenced depending on where they are in their career life cycle and where they've indicated they want to move going forward. So this concept of our hyper-personalized learning path is coming to the fore. personalized recruitment also taking place depending on where you are in the organization. And a lot of that now being made possible by the underlying technology that's available. And the final point I'd make in this space would be obviously a much stronger demand from employees and from people in the workforce for transparency. And that covers a wide area. Transparency necessarily around data sharing, where you find, where organizations find their data, how they use their data in an ethical way, all the way to the products and services that are being provided. So recently, we in IBM have worked with an organization that produces coffee using a QR code, which is available on the package. Prospective clients can now check where the coffee was grown, when it was grown, where it was picked, etc., etc. So the entire supply chain is now much more transparent. I'll go through the rest of the items on this page pretty quickly, but obviously with those key focus areas now coming to the fore, the way the HR function is set up is undergoing fundamental change. We're starting to see offerings managers rather than necessarily centers of expertise, a much higher use of intelligent chatbots and virtual agents, and actually the way HR operates also changing, the concept of pop-up squads. Design thinking becoming a key skill for the HR function, but also the ability to train and coach the rest of the enterprise in using design thinking, especially as you're architecting the employee experience. The next area around decisions and decision making. For those of us who've been around for a while and been in the HR space early on, using behavioral science and intuition was kind of an experience, was kind of where you went to drive decision making. To analytics in the more recent past, the challenge with some of the analytics of the past is that it's sort of backward looking, it's kind of historical data. What we see in the new HR organization as it moves towards digitization is that a lot of the insights are predictive, they're dynamic, so they literally up to date. They are predictive in their capability, and they have multiple data sources from other platforms and from other parts of the other parts of insights where this data sits. And then finally, in terms of key areas of management, how do you check the effectiveness of the HR function? And what we're seeing are different measures coming into play. The degree of critical skills you have in the organization, right down at a very granular level. So we're starting to see reporting move from FTE, and what's the FTE and headcount in your organization, to an expectation where the HR function is able to talk quite eloquently and very accurately around the number of the type of skills in an organization today, very granularly, and the skills required going forward. The other areas I think are more familiar to people: leadership becoming and leadership diversity becoming a major issue and challenge and requirement, and also moving away from using annual engagement surveys to check the pulse of your employees to much more dynamic pulse surveys, some of them being quarterly, some of them being done even in shorter cycles. So those are some of the characteristics that we see in the sort of digital HR organization and space, and what we call HR 3.0. The next few items I'll go through quite quickly, but hopefully that's given you a good foundation. So if I just summarize that very quickly from an HR perspective. So based on the research that we've conducted this year, we interviewed over 1,000 organizations and talent leaders. What we're seeing is the expectation from HR is that HR, becomes gives you the ability to create much more deeply personalized, employee-centered HR services. Skills becoming the new currency, and in fact, decision-making now being driven by data and insights, and that decisions not only give you a historical perspective, but like I said before, have a predictive capability. Yeah. Everything we've said today also points to the need for speed and agility. And so agile practices, agile ways of thinking, being agile in the HR function, but also coaching people in the enterprise in being agile is becoming important, giving the organizations the ability to respond with speed very quickly. And then transparency is quite key. On the far right-hand side of the slide, Josh Persson, a well-known industry analyst in the HR space and worked with us on this particular report, has a comment there which I think is quite pertinent, that kind of summarizes the next generation of HR. And the key points there are that it becomes much less focused on administration and process, but it's really the HR organization of the future is focused on being agile. It's almost a consulting type organization. There's still a need for it to be effective and efficient. The efficiency play doesn't go away, but it also practices design thinking. It's looked to for innovative solutions and transparency. Hopefully that's been very useful in terms of context setting. But as I engage with clients in this space, these are the questions that I often find get put out for me, and we grapple with. Lots of things to focus on, lots of innovative ideas. Which workforce programs and activities should we focus on first, and what should we prioritize? What investments will accelerate the journey, and what will give us the biggest outcomes. So this can be quite complex and sometimes very industry specific. But there are 10 key areas which we think are worth focusing on. And I'll close out the next few minutes with a quick overview of what those 10 critical actions are. So you'll see those 10 based on our research, which we believe which are high priority action areas for HR as they move into this digital environment and has transformed themselves and support the transformation of organizations. And the research is indicating that those organizations and companies, in terms of better profitability and revenue, are taking these 10 key action areas, or at least focusing on them. Now, to be clear, not every organization has the investment capability to do all 10 of them at the same time. So there are some strategic choices to be made. What I will point out on those 10 key action areas or priority areas is that the top 4 are seen to be having the highest impact, and the remaining 6 also still having very high impact, but lesser so. If I pick on just 1 or 2 of these for the discussion today before we open for some Q&A, it would be one of my personal favorites, an area I've been involved in for quite a while. And that is the fundamental need to change the way performance is managed from an employee perspective. So what we're starting to see is those mature organizations are measuring employee performance continuously, and they're measuring them transparently. So from a continuous perspective, we're starting to see the cycle that people are being measured against being much shorter. It's often now quarterly, and there's a regular check-in with your manager or supervisor to check if those objectives and key performance areas are still relevant, because the world of work is changing so quickly. The business models are changing that quickly. So quarterly seems to make more sense than even biannual or annual, which is quite traditional. The other thing that we're seeing in this space is that the conversations are much more developmental in their orientation. It's less about looking back. It's about, what do you need to do to be effective? What do you need to advance your career? What are the skills that you need to develop? And where can you find support to do that? So the discussions are much more developmental in their orientation than in the past. In terms of checking and both parties being able to provide input into the performance, what we're seeing is if an organization has mobile capability, is people being able to either get feedback from multiple sources, teams, peers, on a particular project or activity, and able to give that on a mobile device, so it's kept up to date. It's able to be done quickly and easily across multiple platforms. So mobile capability has been quite useful in this space as well. And of course, by transparency, the fact that you have access to data allows people to see what others are doing and what their metrics are. And so there's this general transparency in this particular space. The other one that I'll just call out very, very briefly is point number 3 here. And this is, again, an area I've been involved in for more than 5 years now, which is the ability to build and apply capabilities in agile, in the use of agile as an approach to continue to build responsiveness into the organization and make you more resilient, and the use of design thinking. And so what we're starting to see, the mature organizations moving towards what we call HR 3.0, equipping and training their HR practitioners in agile and in design thinking, and using design thinking throughout the HR lifecycle, not only in shared services where it seems to have started, but across the employee lifecycle. For example, if you need to, or there's a desire or a plan to change a benefits program, that you use design thinking and you get input from employees into designing that service, putting it out very quickly, which is the agile angle. If it doesn't work very well, being able to change it, pretty much on the fly, and improve that based on employee feedback. So the use of agile and design thinking as two new skills coming into play is key. And the last one is number 7, my personal favorite, which is around a lot of what we're speaking about today is really enabled by access to and use of a modern HR technology platform as organizations move to the cloud. And this move to the cloud and then enabling the ability for the organization and therefore HR to respond very rapidly, to respond at scale, and have access to data and insights to take this forward. So that is the bulk of the discussion today. Just for those of you on the call, I'll just page through some of the other insights. I won't talk to them. I won't have time, but happy to take some questions. But essentially, the rest of the deck, I've put together here some insights on 3 of those 10 key areas and action areas I commented on. Design thinking, agile is the one area I've already spoken about, and here you can see how organizations are focusing on developing HR practitioners and their teams with agile expertise and design thinking. The other area I spoke about very briefly is HR technology and how organizations are moving to cloud-based systems and some of the migration from where they are today to where they need to be on the far right-hand side. And this is a big area in terms of going forward. And then the third one would be using data to drive those insights. And I've touched on all of these themes in the last sort of 20-25 minutes, but the deck does provide some additional information for those of you who want to have a deeper read and some key actions to help get the focus. But that's where we are.